Blessed be the name of my rock, who trains my hands for war, who causes me to walk in his overcoming power forevermore. Blessed be the name of my rock, blessed be the name of my shield.
And good evening. Welcome once again to the Sunday night edition of the Mighty Men, Raising Up Mighty Men of Valor. We are raising up spiritual warriors for the sake of the body of Messiah and helping men to grow into their calling as priests of their home, leaders in their community, and examples for society as to what a godly man looks like. My name is Daryl Weinberg. I am the founder and director of A Light to the Nations Messianic Ministries, and you can find our information on alttnmessianic.com. And of course, there are a number of shows that you can follow along with us on the Lamb Network, which we are on right now. And once again, thanks to them for hosting us and giving us this platform to minister to you. And this evening, I would like to bring on my special guest host, a man who I hold near and dear to my heart, Mr. Mark David Smith. Hello.
There I am.
There you is.
I'm awful rad.
Yeah, you are.
Well, must be the lighting in here.
And I'm awful white and washed out, and I look like I'm about to get waterboarded, but sleep deprived for the next week.
Yeah, sleep deprived. Let me see if I can fix that light. Now you can't hardly see me at all.
Yeah, it's just the no-win situation.
I have the worst lighting situation that there is. It's always...
Oh no, I think I'm giving you a run for your money here.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah. Well, see, I've got the the light from heaven right above me here, and it's shining down, and you'd figure I have a glow about me or something like that, but no. The reality is that I just look like I haven't been out in the sun for about 2 years or something.
Let's do some Edgar Allan Poe. What do you think?
Yeah. I hear a beating under the floorboards. I don't know. Anyway, good to have you aboard, Mark.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And by the way, you sound great tonight, too.
Oh, really? Thank you very much. I hope so. I mean, obviously, I can't tell, but I mean, I got a new mic, and I tested a little bit this afternoon, kind of played with it to find out what I need to do. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sounds good. And we see Tony on. Welcome, Tony. Good to see you as always.
Oh, Tony B.
And I'm sure Paul will be with us shortly. So anyway, how are things going down in your neck of the woods? There's some crazy things going on in North Carolina, I hear.
Oh, there are? Really?
Uh-huh.
Tell me about them. I'm like, well, see, here in North Carolina, we're quarantined. There's this thing going on, and they don't want us to leave. So if there's crazy things going on out there, I really wouldn't know anything about it because they're making us stay inside of our house.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really don't have any idea what's going on in the world at all. I've been stuck in my house for a couple of months now.
Uh-huh.
So crazy thing. Speaking of crazy things, what an awesome little curtain array you have going on back there.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, we bought this a couple of months ago and just never got around to hanging it up. And I figured for Passover, because we were going to have a lot of people looking at us.
Sure.
I figure I better get busy with it. And it improves the view quite a bit. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it does. It's good.
Yeah, so
we get you to get it green like what's behind me, and we can we can place you anywhere.
Well, that is very true.
So you know, I mean, even I've been known sometimes to come in my bathroom. You know, sometimes I'll broadcast from my bathroom. Sometimes I broadcast from my living room. You know, and so and you know, when things get really bad, I start to pray, and angels show up. So you know, you just never can tell what's going to happen.
You're obviously connected.
I'm connected. You know, yeah, it just yeah.
So I have this this meme that I think I need to share. So give me a sec here.
Creepy.
Share. Okay. What's that? Oh, okay. Here we go.
Oh, by the way, while you're doing that, oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So it says, on average, a giant panda eats 12 hours a day. A confined human being eats like a panda. Hence the name, Panda.
Yeah, that works. I haven't made a picture to it, but I've kind of made my own saying for what's going on. I say drink a Corona a day and it'll keep the virus away.
That works. I'm good with that. So tonight we are going to be talking about what it means to be healthy. And one of the reasons why I decided to bring you on is, first of all, we haven't had a chance to have you on in a little while, and always enjoy your input. But you and I actually had a brief conversation today, and you're attempting to make some lifestyle changes, and I thought that dovetails perfectly in with what we're doing. So I'd like to get into that. So Paul says, and I'm going to kind of throw this out there, start off with this. Paul says bodily exercise profits a little, and but spiritual discipline is something that brings great reward. And have you ever seen people in ministry use that as a way of dismissing working out and things like that? So how much credence is there to the idea of what Paul is saying, that, well, we really don't need to be concerned all that much about our bodies, because it's spiritual things that we need to be more concerned about? What would you say to that?
I that's not what is going on at all. I'm just having such a problem with this lady. It's bugging me, man. It's distracting, and you know, I can't keep focus in these distracting times. That's my problem. So so you're just gonna have to see me in some weird lighting is what this deal is. I just don't think that's what it means at all, because I just don't think Paul would. In the first place, back in those days, I think they were so active that they, you know, they were probably in pretty good shape because they were active. I think it's just commonplace. I don't see why anybody would be against physical exertion, physical labor, physical exercise, that type of thing at all. I don't see why anybody would ever say anything against that. It's just not, it's not natural at all. I mean, we need to, I'll put it like this. For me, is that if I don't do physical labor, if I don't do anything physical at all, then I find myself getting fat. You know, I mean, physically, we're not talking, I mean, you can make that as spiritual as you want to make it or whatever, because it also works in the spiritual. I mean, if we sit around and watch TV, we're going to get fat headed. We're not going to be, spiritually minded at all. But I find myself that if I can spend the whole day on a computer and really not do anything physical, and I can definitely see a difference and feel a difference. And if I'm not a certain weight, then I definitely feel I feel fat. I feel sluggish. I think even the word fat will just plain and simply cover a lot of different words, sluggish and I don't know. Anyway, I think there's a lot of proverbs that cover this too. But it's what we eat, it's what we drink, and it's the physical exertion or exercise or whatever.
Well, and the whole subject of health too. I mean, yes, physical is a major component of that. And an area of struggle that I've really had for a long, long time is the level of obesity within the body of Christ, especially in leadership, especially amongst pastors. I really have a hard time with that. And it's something that I got to make sure, as with everything, that I don't fall into judgment on it. But at the same time, if I see a guy who is, and I'm not talking about a little doughy, I'm not talking about someone who may be a little on the soft side. I'm talking about someone who is clocking in at over 100 pounds overweight.
Oh. Okay.
I have a real struggle with that as a spiritual leader, what kind of example are we showing here? Because how can you talk about discipline when you won't discipline your appetite?
Well, that's true. That's very true. Sure.
And there are people who will disagree with me on it. Now, I've always valued physical exercise. I did kickboxing for 27 years. In a club, and I continue to train when I'm given the opportunity, if I go to the gym or something like that. And even while we've been under lockdown, so to speak, I mean, I'm still not confined. I still have work because I'm doing renovation, so I'm able to get out and doing work in the backyard right now, as a matter of fact. But I always try to make sure I work out in the morning before I leave to keep myself limbered up. So, physical exercise is something that I've always valued. I think when Paul says that bodily exercise profits a little, I think he was addressing something in Corinth where they were worshiping the body. And of course, we've seen that if we've ever spent time in the gyms, or if you look at some Hollywood stars, I mean, those guys are ripped. They haven't got an ounce of fat on them anywhere. And to set that as the standard, I think, is entirely unrealistic. And what Paul was saying is, don't idolize the body. Your focus, I think, needs to be on spiritual disciplines. But I think physical fitness, and we're going to incorporate a whole bunch of other things. I mean, I want to talk about eating. I want to talk about mental fitness. I want to talk about all these things. That spiritual disciplines include physical disciplines. I mean, you start getting into things like body chemistry, and that if you don't eat properly, if you don't exercise and get the endorphins going and start detoxifying, you're not going to have energy for things. Correct? I mean, if you're sitting there on your tuchus all day long, you tend to be sluggish and you're not as sharp.
Sure.
So I think it's something that with everything else, I think there needs to be a balance.
Of course, there's balance in everything, no matter what the deal is balance.
Mm-hmm. And you go back to Romans chapter 7, Paul's talking about balance. You've got law, you've got grace, and he's trying to find that balance in between the two. And if you go to one side, you fall into legalism. If you go on the other side, you fall into antinomianism and licentiousness. And what he wants to make sure is that we stay on the straight and narrow. Narrow is the path, he says. And yet I find that principle needs to apply to every other area of our lives.
Right.
And I think the biggest thing, and this is something that I addressed last week in sexual purity, we have to be intentional about what we're doing. And so if we're going to keep ourselves in shape, and I'm not talking about round being a shape either. Just round is a shape, and panda is a shape too, believe it or not. I'm not talking about those shapes. I'm talking about being physically fit, and being fit in all other areas. I think we have to be intentional, because no one ever got into good physical shape sitting on the couch eating a bag of chips. The laws of entropy, or the law of entropy, certainly applies, where if you don't work at keeping order in something, it's going to fall to disorder. So for physical fitness, I think as believers, we need to be an example. And I think even if it's just 5 to 10 minutes a day, we've got to be doing something to keep ourselves in physical shape, especially for those like, Stephen, the guy that I'm staying with. He's an IT director, and his job literally has him sitting at his chair for 10 hours a day. And unless he's intentional about getting up and doing different things, and then you can start getting into things about eye exercises. One of since the computer age, myopia and lazy eye muscles and stuff like that have become a plague. To use a word kind of loosely, but it's a real problem in society, that people's eyesight gets worse and worse as we stare at the screen. You got to exercise your eyes, because your eyes have muscles. And I've been doing some research on it, because I've been wearing glasses since I was 5. And the fact that my vision continues to get worse, I find out that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. The optical industry has not been telling us the truth about things. And there are exercises that we can do. But again, it's easier to just sit there in front of the computer screen or in front of the TV and just veg and put your mind in the back seat, in which case we're going to suffer the consequences. So for me, physical fitness, and we'll get into eating in a second, but because there are different ways of looking at that. But physical fitness, I think, is something that's so critical for us, that we have to be intentional. And listen, if you're sitting at home, you've got all kinds of time on your brother. You've got all kinds of time on your hand, and there's no reason not to do it. And Tony says that weight issues, it's a very sensitive issue. I think that's correct, but I also think we need to be honest about things with people, and that, number one, if you're being a bad example, or number two, it's going to lead to some serious health problems. A comedian that I really enjoyed, he was one of my favorites, a guy by the name of John Panette, and he was came out of Boston, incredibly funny guy, and he was obese most of his life. And most of his comedy actually was about food issues and, his own struggle with weight. And, he had a tour that he was doing around the world in 80 buffets and stuff like that. He was an incredibly funny guy. And he died at 50 years old back in 2014.
Really?
Because now he eventually died of pulmonary, he had a pulmonary embolism. But he struggled with heart and liver issues for years. I mean, at one time, that guy must have been well over 400 pounds. He was immense. And so his weight actually ended up killing him. Another comedian that I've looked at, a guy by the name of Gabriel Iglesias, same thing. He is, his whole name and identity, he calls himself Fluffy.
Right.
And Fluffy. It's just another word for being fat. And they make a joke about it, but it's no joke. I mean, heart disease, it leads to cancer. It can lead to all kinds of things. Plus, you're just not at your best. How many people can't touch their toes coming on to 40? How many people don't know they have toes? So, I mean, it's an issue that I think believers really need to be concerned about. And without being condemning about it, I think it's an honest conversation that we have to have, that our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit. And I think we need to be concerned about that. What do you think?
Well, it's a to me, it's a given. I mean, it's just I don't know, even people that are overweight acknowledge that they are overweight. I don't. And you were talking about that there are people that literally don't agree that physical labor is, or physical exertion, exercise is good for you. Or did I hear you
Well,
wrong?
it's not that it's not good for you. It's just that it's not really something that we need to be all that concerned about.
Okay. Well, okay. I see. I don't see that. I can't imagine even knowing somebody that would even think that. But that's commonplace. I mean, it doesn't even have anything to do with scripture or anything. It's just commonplace that the only way we can survive and have a long life, which every one of us want, is to stay healthy. And in this day and age, not knowing what foods are good, or to eat right, to stay healthy so that you can live long, not only live long, but be able to manage while you're alive, no matter what age you are, from any age, especially in your middle years. I'm 65. I've got a bigger belly than I want. And you were talking about how we talked this afternoon. We know several people that are vegans, and I mean, every time they mention being vegan or that they don't eat meat, that type of thing, it's like I've always blow it off, because I've always heard that, it's I mean, that is scriptural. I mean, I was just hearing something the other day about, preparing your meat and how you prepare it and what meat is good. And, even you were talking about when you, one of the Torah course, I think last week, about the different kinds of meat that are kosher and not kosher and that type of thing. So it's not wrong to eat meat. And matter of fact, it's scripturally correct to eat meat.
Yep.
But they I hate to say, scripture says that it's good, but you never use the word "but" after that. But yet, in today's age, things are different in the food world than they were. And of course, the way that animals are raised, and I mean, there's nothing different as far as kosher and unkosher food. It's exactly the same. Nothing's changed that way. But even kosher food is not necessarily the same as what it was a long time ago.
Well,
raised, the way they're fed, and that type of thing.
And even if you look at the kosher industry. Now, I am not an advocate of eating rabbinically kosher, because I think there's a huge amount of bondage there. And having actually been in the meat industry, I had an organic meat business for a distributorship for 10 years. I know the politics that goes on.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And it's about the money. I'll tell you right now. The meat business is like the Jewish mafia, and they will resort to some very unethical practices in order to make sure that you purchase from them. But as far as eating biblically kosher, which is how I like to describe it, and kosher, the word kosher simply means upright. So you don't actually have that necessarily in the scriptures. The only requirement for meat in the scripture is that you drain the blood. And so having learned all about that, it's how you kill the animal. But in the kosher industry, and it's a huge industry.
Sure.
Okay, you've got kosher, and then you've got kosher for Passover, which is a whole wow. Then you get into all kinds of other crazy stuff. But in the kosher business, again, they're only concerned about how the animal is killed. There is no concern for how the animal is raised. And so when you've got the food industry, and the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry are in bed with each other. I mean, they're joined at the hip. Sometimes they're one and the same. But the same people run both industries. But they've put growth hormones and antibiotics and steroids, and now you've got genetically modified food. I mean, Monsanto is considered to be the most evil company in the world, bought by the other most evil company in the world, Bayer, which produced the Cyclone B gas for the Nazis during World War II for the concentration camps. I mean, this is the type of the companies we're dealing with here. And, Monsanto's Roundup, their weed killer, is so incredibly toxic and known to cause cancer and stuff like that. It has become more and more difficult all the time in order to eat correctly. So there's a debate that now exists within Christianity. And also if you've ever listened to Dave Ramsey, for instance.
I have.
Great guy, love what he does. And I'm a full supporter of his philosophy. That there are times where you just have to tighten the belt and you got to do some very uncomfortable things in order to get out of the debt cycle. Okay, that's fine. However, everybody's got to make a decision. And as my family and I have struggled financially for many years because of not improper spending per se, I mean, we're not profligate or anything like that. It's just that we haven't had income. And so the question is, well, do we tighten down and do we buy the cheapest food possible in order to try to get out of debt? Is that a trade-off we're willing to make? And my family and we decided, no, that wasn't a trade-off we were willing to make. And so it was better for us to continue to be in debt or even accumulate more debt and eat properly, as opposed to eating poorly and getting out of debt.
Uh-huh.
Everybody's got to make that decision, but neither one is right or wrong. It only depends on whether it's right or wrong for you.
Right.
But just realizing that if it's a short-term thing, okay? I mean, if you've hit a road bump, whatever, and you're going to have to kind of lock things down for maybe 6 months to a year or something like that, I can kind of see that philosophy. But if you're eating the cheapest food available out there and you start reading the ingredients and you start understanding what they put into food,
sure,
exposing your body to that over the long term, you're going to end up doing more damage to yourself and possibly leading yourself to have all kinds of health issues for years to come down the road. Is that really worth saving a few bucks in interest? Sure. I don't know. Everybody's got to make that decision.
Well, what I was saying earlier that we have a lot of friends that are vegan or they eat, I guess you could call it plant-based food rather than meat-based food. Mm-hmm. And I saw this documentary, and it was several different athletes. It was weightlifters. It was fighters. It was Olympians. I mean, just every from one range to the other range of people that were athletes. And you would not. I mean, the strongest man in the world eats plant-based food only. Yeah. And they're all talking about, how they all thought that how could they possibly get the right amount of protein if they didn't eat meat? And every one of them have been somewhat addicted to meat in their bodybuilding and keeping in shape in their Olympic athletism, whatever, all this type of thing. But to then whatever came along, and each one of them had a different somebody or something that came along to help them understand the difference between a plant-based diet and a meat-based diet. And they ended up choosing plant-based diet and actually did better than they had on a meat-based diet.
Right.
And one of the examples that they did in this documentary is they took a fire station, a bunch of firemen. There was about 20 different firemen of different ages, anywhere from like 25 to 60 years old. And every one of them volunteered to do 1 week of plant-based diet. 1 week, stay completely away from meat, and they did all of the tests, the cholesterol, every test they could give them at the beginning and after 1 week, and every single one of them were in tenfold better shape at the end of that 1 week than they were before they had lost weight. They were able to do things that they couldn't. They had more energy. They were everything about them, and all of their tests were just top of the line. Their blood pressure was tenfold better. Everything was better than what they had been 1 week before. And they volunteered for this, and they could see the difference of it. One of the things they showed in this documentary was that your arteries have a coating on the inside of them, where the blood goes through your arteries. There's a coating around the inside of that artery. And when you eat meat, that artery does one thing. It kind of like swells up, or it goes a certain way. And then when you eat plant-based meals, it more contracts and lets more blood go through, whereas meat almost kind of pinches, it swells up, making the blood not go through as well. And that stays with you, every person, not anybody different. It stays with you for more than 24 hours like that. And so if you're feeling, sluggish or whatever, and you can tell that there's not something really working well with you, it's got to do with your heart. It's got to do with blood flow. I mean, almost always. And so anyway, they talked to people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was Mr. Universe at one time, and just several other people. Like the guy that can lift the most weight in the world, and several other people. And it was quite an amazing documentary, to the point where it was not something that seemed manipulated at all. It was literally factual, that you have so many testimonies of people that are real people out there that are really involved, and their bodies have to be in tip-top shape to do what they do for a living, and they're all eating plant-based food. And so it really hit me, because at 65 years old, I am on a daily basis thinking of, I want to live as long as I can. I don't know how many more years I've got. My dad died at 90, and he was in great shape when he died. And I would like to be in great shape when I pass on. And at the way it seems right now, because I'm sluggish, I'm not doing great as far as physical. There's a lot of different things that I have to deal with on a daily basis. It's not just aches and pains. I have specific problems that I battle that are very serious chronic problems. And I wonder sometimes if it doesn't have to do with circulation, if it doesn't have to do with what I eat and how I eat and when I eat and the discipline of eating. You can't, you say discipline of eating doesn't just mean what food you eat. It means when you eat, how you eat, what you eat. It's all of that.
That brings up another subject that I think we need to address, because not only is it a physical discipline, but a spiritual one, but it's the discipline of fasting. And that has become, that's almost like the dodo bird nowadays when it comes to Christian culture, the idea of regular fasting. And yet you start to listen to what's going on in the media and it's making a comeback. Now they're talking about things like intermittent fasting. And so you can decide that you're going to stop eating, almost like Ramadan, actually, where you stop eating for certain portions during the day and then you eat later. So if you stop eating after 6 o'clock at night and you don't do any late night snacking,
right.
There's a great way to lose weight, and also to have better sleep, because you don't want to load up your digestive system to be working that hard while you're supposed to be resting and stuff like that. But fasting, and again, look how God designs things, that the human body is designed to respond to spiritual disciplines to make you healthier. And so that if you fast, and a couple of years ago, I've mentioned this many times, when we did the predecessor to the Chameleon Church Show, when it was still Let Us Reason Together on Tuesdays, the 4 guys who were on there all committed together to do fasting for 24 hours.
I remember.
And I still do that. I don't think anybody else has kept that, but I still do that. So from Monday night to Tuesday night, and I've been thinking about that for years. And it was because we came into a collective agreement. And I'll tell you something. I am right now at the lowest weight that I've been regularly for over 25 years.
Wow. Really?
About 25 years ago. So when I was in my, before I hit 28 years old, was the last time I was regularly at this weight.
Wow.
I for a number of years, I was up to, so I'm about 180 now. I was up to 200 for many, many years. And actually, when I was pastoring in California, there was a lot of late night restaurants and something like that. I got up to 210 until I looked in the mirror and I saw that I was in my 7th month. And I'm
20 pounds more than what I should be to feel perfect. I don't know ideal weight, what I'm supposed to be. I don't know. I just know that if I'm around 195, then I feel great. When in the past, when I've been 195, I've just constantly felt great all day. Now I fluctuate between like 100 and 16, around 115, 116,
200,
like that. A 200. You're right. 213 to about 216. And I'm actively trying to lose weight, but I lost 10 pounds in about 12 days, and now I'm just kind of setting. But if I could lose 20 more, I'd be great, man.
Well, and the way that I lost the weight initially was that I did a long-term fast, and I felt it was what God was leading me into because I was seeking direction. And I lost 27 pounds in the fast and never gained it back again because I got rid of a lot of stuff I had been carrying around for a lot of years. Now, even when I was in California, I was working out 3 times a week. I was probably in the best physical shape that I was ever in my life. 15 years ago, but I was still carrying around too much in fat. And when I did the fast, I got rid of it. And so it was a great spiritual discipline because it led me to the next direction. It was right after that soon that I established a Light to the Nations ministries and everything else. But physically, it has allowed me to keep my weight at a much better level for me. So fasting is something that, although it's designed mainly for spiritual purposes, because if you deny the body, it's easier to connect in spiritual things. But I think God designed it that way so that there would be more of an incentive. And water fast, and there's different types of fast you can do too. There's water fasts, which you would call a regular fast. There's a complete fast that's without water. You only do that for a day or two at a time. And Esther did it 3 days, and so did the Amalekite that King David found. He had gone 3 days and 3 nights without water or food. Or there's a partial fast where you kind of like the Catholics and the Lutherans do for Lent. They give up something for 40 days, coffee, chocolate, something like that. So there are different disciplines that you can apply, but the idea of fasting is a really great way to regulate your body, get rid of toxins, and I think get closer to God at the same time. So, I think physically we got to be really concerned, and it's more and more difficult to find good food, and it costs more and more money now. I mean, the idea that you have to pay extra for having less in your food, i.e. pesticides and stuff like that, it's mind-boggling.
Right.
But that's how upside down society is.
I think it also has to do with where you live. Because for the most part, if we live in a city, especially, or a larger town, and you're subject to having to buy food, and like Tony said, he stopped eating at a restaurant and dropped 30 pounds in 3 months. I get it. I mean, if you eat that way, and then that's all being part of living in a city, working in a city, and you're a part of that. Whereas if you live in a very small town or live in the country where you have to watch the food that you're buying or the food that you're growing, that type of thing, it's just a completely different scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it also, I think, really, it's about lifestyle choices.
It is,
and what we're willing to do. I mean, I am blessed in that my wife is an amazing cook. These Eastern European girls, they train them up right. And when she moved from her grandparents to her parents' place at 10 years old. The first thing her mother did was threw her into the kitchen, says, "You're going to learn how to keep house now." And even though my wife wasn't necessarily happy about that, it has allowed her to become an amazing homemaker. Not every guy is so blessed that he has a wife who can cook. But I think that, basic recipes aren't really all that difficult. But again, what are we willing to do? What are we willing to put up with? I understand that there are probably benefits to not eating meat, and I might even live longer if I gave up meat, but I would also wonder why I was living longer. So, there are choices we all have to make in what we're willing to put up with.
Well, my deal about the meat and the plant-based, though, is that I really do believe, and I do believe that the meat does cause our arteries to clog up quicker, and that it causes our bodies to be sluggish.
Well, and also,
I don't want,
but it depends on the type of meat too.
I get it. I understand. I mean, fish. We just had fish today. And last night, and of course, we live on the coast, so we can get some fresh fish. That's a completely different story. But I don't have a problem with eating a hamburger every once in a while.
Yep.
It's just not, twice, 3 times a week. It's a whole different story. If you can,
and it also depends on your blood type too. I think some people are just more. I find that when it comes to my wife and I, she was a vegetarian for a while actually when I met her, and I had just started my meat business, and you can just show how God can overcome even monumental obstacles like that.
Yeah.
But the reason why Milena was a vegetarian is because she couldn't digest meat. And we found out it was because of all the toxins that were in conventional
Right.
meat. As soon as she started eating organic, she found she was okay with it. And I praise God every day because of that.
Right. Right.
So we also have to make sure that we're getting the good quality stuff. And, like Tony says, you do what you can. Not everybody's able to afford organic. I mean, if, a big thing now, for instance, is keto. Everybody wants to go keto because they found out that carbs are no good, translates to sugar. Sugar is an absolute killer. So everybody's trying to go keto. Well, try buying keto flour and see how many mortgage payments you have to make in order to survive on that stuff. Like almond flour, for instance, is $175,000 per 100 grams. I mean, it's ridiculous. And most people aren't able to eat like that.
Right.
So I think one thing that we need to do is we got to trust God. We need to pray over our food and plead the blood over whatever we eat, asking God to forgive any sins, because we don't eat everything organic. We try as much as we can. Sometimes we go halfway and get there. There's a whole free from brand now that's just free from antibiotics and steroids, but not necessarily organic feed. And so that they're probably eating GMO stuff. That they're probably eating corn, which is no good, and stuff like that. But I don't want to spend all of our time on food. I want to get to a couple of other things too. Mental health. How important is that, especially in this day and age? Wow.
Now I know why you invited me. Mental health. You never said we were going to talk about mental health. I have nothing to say about mental health. Nothing at all.
You're having flashbacks to the nurse in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Not me. I have nothing to say. Nothing at all.
We live in stressful times. Has anybody kind of figured that out? And yet maintaining a balance in mental health is so important. And how do we do that? Well, part of that is exercise, because your physical exercise will determine the hormones you release in your body, endorphins and stuff like that, and the serotonin levels. A big killer nowadays, blue light. The blue light that emits off of all of our devices. And so it is highly recommended. Number one, you have a filter on your computer and on your phones and stuff like that. Don't use them late at night before you go to bed. Don't have light, especially blue light, actually shines in your room. Make sure that you are get proper sleep. Make sure you're getting it's as dark as possible. I mean, there's so much light pollution especially in the big cities. I mean,
I'm sorry. What'd you say? I was looking at my phone.
Yeah, exactly.
What'd you say?
Light pollution is terrible. And what's interesting is that even if you can't see it, our skin has sensors, and you can pick up light on your skin, and that will disrupt your sleep patterns. So if you are accustomed to sleeping with a night light, you're not going to get the quality of sleep that you would if it's complete darkness. You won't get that deep REM sleep that we all need in order to detoxify our brains. Getting enough sleep is really important, and people are different on that. It is suggested that 7.5 to 8 hours is usually the standard, but some people can survive on less. Some people need a little more, and also depends on their health. Because what sleep does is it detoxifies the body, and if you take a lot of medications, pharmaceuticals, which is a whole other story, and you have health issues and a lot of toxins in your system, you're going to require more sleep. Candy jar. There you go.
Yes, my candy jar. That's right.
So that's very important as well. Electromagnetic pollution. So having all these devices all over our house, it's suggested that for the last hour before you go to bed and the first hour you wake up, don't look at your phone, because there's also that tendency to constantly look, and it's an addiction. They say that the Facebook ding and all this stuff that causes us to look at our device produces the same effect in the brain as crack cocaine. And so we complain that this generation doesn't have any focus. Well, we've conditioned that with our devices.
I believe it. I believe it.
I mean, and there's some pretty powerful stuff out there that you can look at that will demonstrate this physiologically. And we got to have stress relievers. If you're married, try having date nights. Make sure that now everybody's got a date night all the time because you're locked down. But doing stuff with our family that's fun and taking the pressure off, reading and doing relaxing exercises. So maintaining a balance and ensuring that we're not toxifying ourselves in all these different areas is becoming more and more critical, because the whole focus of our show here is raising up mighty men of valor. We're soldiers, and a soldier had to have stamina beyond what the average person is. And the more elite that you go, if you're in the United States, it's the Navy SEALs. Those are kind of like your crack shock teams, the guys you send in for the really tough missions, the Marines or something like that. In Canada, it's the Joint Special Forces, and we're supposed to be becoming that for God. And so the physical disciplines, the spiritual disciplines, the emotional disciplines, how do we deal with stuff like, now that everybody's had to be in lockdown for over a month, how many people are having to deal with each other where they didn't have to before? And you've got abuse situations happening in the home. You've got neglect. You've got arguments and divorces and stuff like that. These are tough times we live in. And because we are so ill prepared, because our mental and physical and emotional and psychological health is so frail now, that when the enemy comes in, we don't have any natural defenses. We don't have any way of fighting back if we're already stretched thin. You know what I'm saying?
Sure, I do. I think I say it all the time on every show I'm on. I think it's going to be a very interesting next year. During this coming year, all the stories that we're going to hear of positive, negative, good things that have happened, critical things that have happened, and the results of being in lockdown for so long. I think it's amazing. And I've tried to put myself in or think about different situations where, different work situations that people are in that can't do that. I mean, like, for instance, big corporations have to keep those billions of dollars rolling in and constantly moving, or their whole corporation goes under, and hundreds of thousands of people are affected, and I mean, from the top that to, people that live literally from paycheck to paycheck. It's just, it's amazing all the different scenarios that the world, not just the United States, the world is in. I mean, all over the world, you've got just, I don't know. I'm just going to turn the light out, man. So this thing doesn't like me whatsoever at all. Anyway, it's just amazing, all the different scenarios there are around the world, and we don't think about that.
No,
we don't commonly think about those things. We get caught up in our own day-to-day lives so much that we don't open up to that. Now, things are different where I'm at right now, right here. I can come and go as I please any time of day. Yep. I have, and I always have. Matter of fact, when I get ready to go to Home Depot or go rent a movie or go to Walmart or go, across town, I pick up senior meals and deliver senior meals, all those things. I have not once ever thought about whether or not I'm supposed to be out or there's a quarantine. I just don't, because I don't think about those things. My day-to-day life is for Lamb Radio anyway. I work for Lamb Radio, and I am in that normal mode as it is anyway. I don't have to go out and hold down an 8-hour job. I don't have to, travel and do all of this kind of stuff. So I'm not in those scenarios that I have lived my life that way. But so even though I have lived my life that way, I can place myself in other people's positions. And I've thought about this, is that, the distress that so many people must be in that we don't hear about,
right?
It doesn't mean that it's not happening, and I think that the stories are going to be exploding once the quarantine's lifted, once things, and will things ever get back to normal? Normal the way we thought of it before we didn't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Get what I'm saying?
Yep.
And will it ever get back to that way? For some of us, it will. For others, it won't.
Well, society is it's changing very rapidly. And I think one of the reasons God allowed this to go out there is because there had to be a reset for what was going on. There was so much lunacy that was going on out there with the whole transgenderism and the Russian hoax thing and all this other stuff, and just the madness that was going on. God had to say, enough, and allowed this thing to go. How society is going to come out of this over the next little while. I think we've got some guys who I think are fairly well reputed in the prophetic arena have said that starting at the end of April, we're going to have about 4 months of recovery. What happens in those 4 months will determine what happens when we get to the fall feasts.
That's sounds about right.
I think that lines up with what the Lord has been speaking to my spirit about. That the picture I'm getting is that there's a whole bunch of people that are at the starting gate. The starter's pistol is just about to fire and the gates are about to open. Are the believers going to take the charge and run out the head of the pack? Are we the remnant who have the solution to society's ills, which is Messiah, him crucified, and living a life of obedience? If we can somehow convey that message far and wide enough, we could see revival. If we allow the globalists to continue to push their agenda, which is meant for our destruction, and we allow them to, then all of this will have been for nothing. And the next round will be a lot worse. And so I think, number one, we need to be praying. I'm going to start reaching out to pastors, because Justin Trudeau has been telling us that we're not getting back to normal until there is a vaccine, and that's 12 to 18 months away. Well, if that dude thinks that we're just going to sit around and watch our entire country go down the tubes while, Nero fiddles while Rome burns, he's got another thing coming. But again, God is placing the onus on us as the believers, especially the remnant, to lead the charge on how this is going to go. We got to get praying. We have to be on our knees, and we have to be petitioning the Lord that he not allow what has been spoken by our prime minister. And I think a lot of the same thing has to happen for Americans. I think Trump is trying to do the right thing. I think he is, in very poor judgment, surrounded himself with a bunch of people who he ought not to have around him. And I don't know who keeps advising him to pick some of these guys, but Tony Fauci, that guy should have been jettisoned a long time ago. And why the hell is everybody listening to Bill Gates, who doesn't even have a medical background? Good heavens. I mean, does anything make less sense?
I get it. I get it. There's more to it than that. There's more to it.
Well, there always is. There are many, many layers. Yeah. But the bottom line is that we as the remnant, we as those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Yeshua, we're going to be the standard bearers in these last days. Mm-hmm. And so for us to make sure that we've got proper health, mental, physical, and part of that's our spiritual disciplines. I mean, if you want to have good mental health, make sure you're in your Bible every day.
Yeah.
We have to renew our minds. There's a new documentary that just came out, and it's called Out of the Shadows. And if you haven't had a chance to watch it, I really encourage you to do so. It was made by a guy who was a stuntman in Hollywood for over 20 years. And he had a very serious injury. He did a jump and ended up landing on a window, and he landed where the frame was, the metal frame to support the window. So it was like one of these skylight things. And he landed right on the metal thing and shattered his back. And in therapy, his therapist was a believer, and she ended up, leading him to faith. And he wrote a documentary about what goes on in Hollywood. And what God is doing right now is he's exposing everything.
Sure.
And it's guys like that who, even though he's a new believer, I mean, he's guy's in incredible physical shape, and he was a stuntman. I mean, he's got a lot of mental discipline too. And so he puts together this documentary exposing how incredibly evil Hollywood is, and goes into a whole bunch of things. Phenomenal stuff. We need to be on the forefront of doing that. But if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to hear the voice of the Holy Spirit, and we're not going to be able to leave, Egypt when he says to leave.
Right.
So there are all kinds of different components. Next week, I'm going to cover some of the scriptural things about what it means to have a healthy, balanced lifestyle and all these different areas. But I think it's important that we talk about these things. We have to have a life of purity. That's healthy too. You have to have a healthy sex life. Am I allowed to say that? Of course we are. We need to make sure that our physical needs are being taken care of in the marriage. And so guys, if things aren't that kosher at home, you better start, buying flowers. And if you can't get out, order them in. Make sure that your wife, especially if she has to put up with you a whole lot more than what is normal, and she's not accustomed to that, then, make sure you're going the extra mile in order to make her feel like the princess that she is, and the daughter of God that she is. And there will be harmony in the home. There will be, making sure that we're doing stuff with our kids, and there's a healthy balance, and good, we're absorbing good stuff. We're filling our minds with good stuff. Don't sit there and watch a bunch of horror movies and stuff like that, and watching a whole bunch of people get blown up and whatnot. I mean, that's just not going to make you feel very good. It's like they say, garbage in, garbage out. Well, the same applies to our food. Same applies to our media, and everything else that we do.
So what you're saying is that I can't watch movies with gratuitous violence in them?
Oh, I would never suggest that.
Oh, okay.
I just don't, just don't binge watch them.
Oh, I get it. Okay. All right.
Listen, man, if I don't see something blowing up on a fairly regular basis, then, last week, we ended up watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy here. Uh-huh. And about once a year, I get this, deep stirring within my soul that I have to watch a bunch of orcs get killed.
Yeah, I've watched it maybe 3 times all the way through. Yeah, I've done that. Yeah.
But now I found someone who's got the extended version, so that means there's going to even be more orcs dying, which excites me to no end. But just the other night we watched Paul, the Apostle of Christ. So where we're staying, they have Netflix, and there's a lot of good Christian movies that are on, and we've really been blessed by that too. And I'll tell you, watching that and what they were going through, under the time of Nero, where, as I said, they were lighting Christians up as human candles and stuff like that.
Right.
It's
right.
What we're dealing with doesn't yet approach the level of persecution that the first believers did.
Yeah.
And every one of them, every one of the apostles, save John, was martyred for the faith. Thousands and thousands and you look what's going on in China, you look what's going on in Syria and Iraq right now, where ISIS was running rampant. We don't have any idea. And so what God is doing is, with this coronavirus, he's sending a warning shot. Church better wake up, because otherwise we're going to find ourselves in the same position, and it will have been on our watch.
Yeah.
So we got to get
better be in good mental health.
Good mental health, good physical health, good emotional health, and making sure that the relationships keep going. I think there's a lot of people communicating with each other a lot more than they were before. You got regular family meetings happening on Zoom and stuff like that. So there are some positive things that are coming out of it. And I had a great testimony that one of the guys down here, he and I, we went out grabbed a coffee today, and he said to me, since this whole thing has happened, he's been praying more, and he's been, reading the Bible more systematically. That's a positive outcome of all this. And I think that's what God was desiring. He wants us to increase our disciplines that are good for us, and stop allowing the world to yank us in 27 different directions like it has been. So we want
Tony asks, how do we prepare for that?
For the persecution that's to come?
Yeah, all of it. I mean, if things are going to get tougher, and I think I already said the quarantine was not tough for me. So I don't think I've gone through it, but a lot of people are in despair. I think that it will get more despair. I think that times are going to get rougher. We're going to go through some pretty heavy things. How do we prepare for the heavy things that are bound to happen?
Well, we have to be in prayer more. We have to be reading the word more. So we got to know our scriptures. Always be prepared for anyone who asks to give an answer for the hope that lies within you. We have to develop community. We have people that we can rely on. One of the things in the Paul, the Apostle of Christ, when Aquila and Priscilla, they were leading the community in Rome, and it was under persecution. And so they were kind of hiding out. They all kind of lived in this one enclave. It was like a ghetto. And they could rely on each other. And I think as, we're headed toward Christianity being driven underground here in North America, which is well on its way, if we're in community with each other, you're going to have to start getting communes. It's going to be like the kibbutz system over in Israel, where we I'm sure you've seen the movie Defiance,
right,
about the Bielski brothers in World War II. And so they gathered these community of people who were fleeing the Nazis, and they lived out in the forest, very, very tough conditions. but they were able to rely on each other, and you had all kinds of people with different skills. And one of the things that Melena and I have been noticing is that God seems to be moving people around, locales strategically to place them in communities. You've got people who are coming into North Carolina. There are people who are kind of coming into the Niagara Falls area as well. And we seem to be having these little communities here that are God's beginning to gather his people together so that we can function in community and, model the Acts 2:42 church.
Well, grab all those people moving into Niagara Falls, grab them and bring them down here. Get Tony, you grab the people around you, bring them down here, because we're ready. We're ready to get this all together here.
We'll get the New Jerusalem started down there. Huh?
It's not cold like it is way up there. It's good. It's a great place to be. So,
all right. Well, I want to thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for joining us tonight. It was a joy to have you.
Lost my voice.
I'll choke up.
Swallowed something there. Sorry. It's my pleasure, brother. I really appreciate your having me on here. I really, really enjoyed it.
Is that enough, Tony? Well, I think it's really the leading of the Holy Spirit as to what he wants us all to do. But, we've just got some basic ideas, and really it all depends on his leading. So, all right, gentlemen. Well, next week, we'll get back to the same subject, but I'll deal with it from more of a scriptural perspective. And we trust that God has us in his grip, and he has promised he will neither leave us nor forsake us, but we got to be seeking him out. All right. Well, have a great evening, everybody. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the upside. Take care.
Amen. God bless.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.
Blessed be the name of my rock, who trains my hands for war, who causes me to walk in his overcoming power.